Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we have Jason McCreary, aka JMac, aka Gone Dark, who's the creator of Laravel Shift, many awesome pull requests to Laravel, and much more. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you.
Yes, so I guess start off with why do we have three names? Like you couldn't settle on one. You're just like, I'm gonna have all these.
Jason McCreary, I guess, is what my parents gave me. JMac, I've mentioned it, kind of a Laracon talk. I don't know why, but every job I've ever had, there has been at least one other Jason. I've been on a smaller team where there were four Jasons. So by that point in time, everybody was, you do kind of high school, you do your last name. Hey, McCreary, But, that kind of didn't even work. There was another one, Jason Meredith was his name. So, like, there was a JMac. There was a Jason McKee that I worked with one time. So JMac, so it was just, eventually it was like, okay, you're just Jason and you're JMac and so that's where JMac came from. Gone Dark was just, I think when I first joined Twitter, I was watching Jack Bauer 24, right? You remember the old,
Yeah.
I mean, we're Zoomers, so you probably remember the old TV series of Jack Bauer. But anyway, I always thought it was hilarious when Jack Bauer was like, I'm going to go dark, and like that was when he was like super spy out of communication, and I just thought that was a stupid, ironical, name to have for Twitter, massively public, tweets at the time. I thought that was funny.
It is. That's good. Yeah, it's funny because we used to, showing my age when 24 came out, it was like a thing. Like everybody, we would like go to my buddy's house and we would watch it. It's like, what's going to happen in the 13th hour?
People don't understand the excitement of an old show like that was really pre-internet and DVR and all this stuff and no binging. I mean, you had to wait a week and talk to your friends and guess what was going to be on the next show. Like, some of the excitement's gone because of that, I think, So,
yes, totally agree.
yeah, I think Lost was one of the first shows that was pretty cool, where it was just like deep internet archives that was probably the best balance of week to week, but then also internet. Now it's all kind of ruined. You can just watch every episode in an hour.
Yeah, and yeah, that's been our consumption now. Is like you find a series and you just binge it, and then you're like, oh, well, what are we gonna do now? And it's like, oh,
yeah, okay, that's done. You can't even appreciate it almost. It's just like it's done now.
For sure. All right, so let's jump into Laravel 12, which is coming out. As of this recording, it's coming out in about 2 weeks. So by the time we publish, it'll be right around the time. I have been following along a little bit. You have been actually deep into it because you've been doing live streams on Laravel 12 stuff. So what specifically have you been working on with it?
A lot of the live streams actually were more ideas. I always kind of have these things that I want to see be in the framework, and then of course you get busy the whole year, and then they announce Laravel 12's coming, 2 weeks, and you're like, oh crap, I wanted to see if I could add this, and they're normally bigger concepts that, like, you couldn't throw out in a minor release. Maybe it's a breaking change, maybe it's a convention change, maybe it's a default value that gets changed. So those are kind of more what the live streams the last few weeks have been, is just like, can these tiny little things get into Laravel 12 as potentially breaking changes? Because, you get once a year to try to get something that's breaking. And we all know, and I'm sure we'll talk about, Taylor's now of the stance, he hates breaking changes, no breaking changes, So some of them got in, some of them didn't. Some of them are, they're tiny little paper cuts. But yeah, that's just me as a Laravel user. That's kind of unrelated to Shift. It's just me, like, as someone who's used Laravel for 10 years, here's some small little power user things that, like, I would love to readdress. I would love to have more attention, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, which that sort of brings me to you're very good at the paper cuts, because the current Laravel release that came out yesterday had all these new little date, relative date methods, and I know they got declined before, but for me,
Yes.
I just love little stuff like this. Like, it's easy to talk about it. It's fun. You can, you can refactor all this stuff. So how did that come out? You just like, I'm going to do this again, and it's going to go through this time.
Yeah, I was working on that side project with JT, and I wrote it. Like, a lot of the times these paper cuts, like, again, as someone who's used Laravel for 10 years, sometimes you make assumptions of like, well, this has to exist, right? Like, you don't necessarily have the autocomplete or something, but you're kind of like, there's so many beautiful, human, expressive, chained methods in Laravel that a lot of times you're just like, hey, I wonder if where past exists on Query Builder, right? And I'd done that 2 or 3 times in this other side project, and it wasn't there. And I was like, I feel like this was there. And then I stumbled on that PR that it got, declined, I guess 2 or 3 years ago now. And I was like, I'm just going to resubmit this in its current state and see if it gets in. Because honestly, sometimes it just gets in, right? Like, everybody's got a new mindset. There's more to the framework now. There's more of these kind of helpful methods. Taylor's in a different place. Maybe he now sees a need, right? So there's just so many factors. And it's funny that you said that you liked it, because, yeah, it's just, I find lately sometimes these things are met, as the community grows, you get more opinions, right? That's just how the world works. And sometimes these PRs, like, they're just met with some thumbs downy stuff lately. And I'm just kind of like, I don't know, that doesn't feel the way past, sometimes they just get in right away. They're not even whatever. And then other times you'll get 50 thumbs ups and it gets closed. And then other times you'll get, 10 thumbs down and it gets merged. So it's just funny is all, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, I assume a lot of it just comes down to what the end reviewer thinks that day, like if it's Taylor or if it's somebody else. It's just like, you just need to catch them on that right moment. And
I think it's always Taylor. I mean, he says that anyway. There are other people that might chime in from the team, but he, I think, is still to this day, like, merges every PR. Like, it's a point of pride for him. The framework is always going to be his baby, I think.
Yeah, I think, from everything I've heard too, I do agree with that. But I was going to say, Laravel itself has actually been merging more of those. We've got that number helper. I think Kowakan put in. There's been all these little helpers in this I feel like in the last year that's came about. And again, I think they're super useful and super fun to talk about. But yeah,
I kind of mentioned that I mentioned that to Taylor, like, especially, we were talking about these date things, because he was kind of, oh yeah, I dig it. I don't know why we didn't merge this before, kind of thing. And like, it's one of those things where, I think the framework is so large now that you're going to have to have aliases for things. Like, naming's so subjective. If you want to appeal to the broadest audience, you can't just be stark about, okay, well, this is the technical name that we're going to use. Like, you need to allow, like, where not and, missing versus exists or both. So there's going to be a lot of aliases for methods that maybe one person likes missing and one person likes not exists, right? Like, it's just, again, it's the way the world is, right?
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Tailwind CSS with the way they spell gray, and then I spell it the opposite way, and it's like I always have to go in and put an alias in because I can't spell it the other way.
Yeah. I think at some point they said no, it's just gray with an A. I don't know, but I remember gray with the E for a little while.
Yeah.
So, you could choose that as a framework, but I'm glad that Laravel doesn't, right? I think if you want to appeal to the most, don't do it willy-nilly on everything, but once you do it once, you kind of have to accept that you're going to get PRs for a bunch of aliases. And
yeah. Well, so, as you're submitting pull requests and looking through the framework and stuff like that, I know you talked about, fixing little paper cuts and things. With Taylor saying that Laravel 12 is not going to be a breaking change, or I want to say that's what he said, right? There's going to be no breaking changes in 12.
No breaking changes. Yeah.
No breaking changes.
It's the claim.
The claim. Yes. I was going to say, how's that going to work going forward? Is this just going to be like a one-off release this way, or do you think they're going to keep striving to not have breaking changes?
I do think it's a trend for Taylor and team. I know Nuno has been a big fan of things like Rust, and I know there are things of these other languages. There are traits of them that, they don't have necessarily big, huge releases, or they don't have breaking changes. You just kind of toggle on features, or you opt into features. So there is maybe something there for the future. At the same time, I mean, we have to be a little bit realistic in the fact that, like, no breaking changes. There's some nuance to breaking change. That statement. There's some nuance, right? We all know this. Like, just because there are no breaking changes doesn't mean there are no changes. So it's not like you can just truly go into your new app and say, or your Laravel 11 app and say composer update, and it just runs Laravel 12. Like, you, at the minimum, you got to go in, you got to bump your dependencies in your composer JSON file. You got to review some things to make sure there aren't some new pieces that have to come into the core files or config. I mean, config files are always changing. Every minor release, there's a new env variable or a new line of code or a new option inside of a config file. So, if you upgraded to Laravel 11 last March, you have a year worth. You have 52 releases, minor releases of Laravel that have happened since then. And there's a lot, as we just talked about, there's a lot of stuff in each one of those things. So,
yeah,
what direction is the framework heading as far as major releases and breaking changes? I don't know. That might be a trend, but at the same time, the parallel that maybe we're getting at here is, what is Shift going to do, right? And there's always stuff to change. There's always code that changes. I think we all know it's never just as simple as running composer update. Maybe it is once or twice, but it's not by Laravel 13, 14. At some point, you're going to pay down those kind of shortcuts that you took along the way. And so Shift is always going to be there to kind of make sure that your app truly looks and feels like Laravel 12, right? Like, there's a huge difference between Laravel 10 and Laravel 11, right? That was a huge release. I think it gets underplayed because the docs kind of say, don't worry about changing your structure. But there's a lot there between if you go look at a Laravel 10 app and you look at a Laravel 11 app, completely different. The way in which you do almost everything is completely different. The way you register middleware, different. The way you configure your app or bootstrap your application, different. The way you put things in service providers, different. There are no more kernels. So much changed in Laravel 11. And again, I think because of the upgrade guide, not everybody moved to that structure. So if nothing else, the Laravel 12 shift would make sure that you are following, everyone's going to slowly move to that structure. We all kind of know this deep down. And who knows if that older structure ever gets, unsupported. This happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Laravel Shift, I've basically Laravel News website, I always run it through Shift, and it's just, I mean, like you said, I was going back to Laravel 10 versus Laravel 11. I went through the upgrade guide and I was like, this is not too bad, but I was like, I'm going to do it anyway because I don't want to spend any time on this really.
Yeah.
And then it was like, boom, here's like 70 commits to fix all this stuff and change it around. I was like, this is perfect. Like, it was so good to go through that and just have it, not even have to think twice because you've already done the hard work. Like, why am I going to waste this time of my life when you're doing it? We could send you some money and it's just done.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, it's always, the statements of, hopefully you can just run composer update and be on Laravel 12. That's always going to be a possibility. That always has been a possibility. I think where Shift's value really, really comes, and where I hope that over the last 10 years I've kind of earned the reputation, is that Shift, again, its goal is that your application looks and feels like Laravel 12. It's not just running Laravel 12. It actually looks like Laravel 12. Your example code, your code matches the examples from the documentation. The conventions are adopted. You are truly running a Laravel 12 application. In that regard, Shift has always gone far beyond the upgrade guide, very much so for 11, as you noted. And it'll continue to do that. So I hope that even if there were truly no breaking changes, like there's still going to be a value add that Shift can offer. Honestly, I'm kind of excited because it allows me to focus on more of those conventional code changes that, with 11, I got to move your files or I got to do a lot of work there and I don't want to make the PR too noisy. So maybe I didn't do some code refactoring things, but if there truly are no breaking changes, I get to focus more on like the cool refactor stuff, right? And that's what I think is really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess just from like say you've got this old app, it's running, I don't know, Laravel 10, and now Laravel 12 is about to come out, and you're like, well, I really need to be on Laravel 11. I guess the recommended pathway for Shift is you would go and run the 10 to 11 shift, do that, and then run the 11 to 12 shift once it's out. Is that sort of the flow you like to do? Or is it just like, boom, 10 to 12, and then you have like even more commits, I guess?
Yeah, all shifts are always incremental. And this is kind of for focus and context. I mean, if you were on Laravel 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, and you tried to jump in one shot to 12, and then there's an error. Well, where did the error happen? Where do I go look to get help? Do I look in the context of Laravel 11? Like, how do I refine that search, right, or that prompt to like know what I'm looking at? I mean, hopefully you have a good error message, but I find that the incremental ones help again with that context of like, okay, I'm going from 10 to 11 and now I got this error, and it's very, just throwing on Laravel 11 and the error is going to give you far better results, far better information if you were to encounter a problem. Then, again, if you're trying to lump sum upgrade several versions, you kind of just don't even know where you're aiming if you run into a problem. And that alone, that single error can burn all the time that you would have spent running one extra shift, right?
Yeah. That actually brings a question. This is totally theoretical. If you're on a Laravel 7 app, Laravel 12's coming out, it would take you a month to go through all the code changes without going through Shift. I don't even know if that would be fun or possible without Shift at this point.
I think a lot of people think when they get that far behind, I'll just make a Laravel new and then copy my code over. A lot of people think that's what I can do. But that completely dismisses all of the code changes, right? Like, things change, traits change, facades change, method signatures change. So really, again, all you're doing is, sure, you have a new Laravel 12 app, but you're bringing in all your legacy code over. And yeah, it might run, but the same thing, someday when the wheels fall off that, and they will someday, you're going to have no context of what broke. You're going to have no information because you're just going to think kind of naively like, I was running Laravel 12. Well, not really. You were running Laravel 12 of a Laravel 7 code base, and that's just going to be a problem. So
that's very true. So I guess if you go back in time, like in the beginning, why did you, or what just spurred you to be like, hey, I want to create this thing that will auto upgrade people? As far as the beginning of Laravel Shift.
Sure. The origin story in a nutshell, and I think one of the last kind of series of our base code podcast that I used to do with Jess, I kind of did a solo series at the end that went through kind of the genesis of Shift. And honestly, it was kind of like a historical record for me because I'm going in the 10th year of Shift now, and I've got kids now. I don't sleep as much. Like, I was kind of forgetting some of the details, right? I mean, it's been a while. But the short story is like, I was at a PHP conference and Taylor was there, and I gave a talk on upgrading at the time. It was upgrading from Laravel 4.2 to 5, a big, huge, major release. And after the talk, I caught up with Taylor, and I was like, hey, do you know of any scripts that help with this, or have you thought about any? And he was like, man, a few words. Of course, he was like, no, but I'd use it. And I was like, whoa, light bulbs, right? So like, that night at the hackathon, I worked on some scripts that would automate a lot of these things, right? Because again, it was folder structure moves, it was files changed, it was, okay, now controllers extend this other controller, okay, now models are namespaced, like all these things, right? That could be automated. And I think it was funny, he was, as a bit of history, he was hacking on this little JavaScript framework called Vue and trying to bring it into Laravel 5.1. And so it was interesting because I was kind of bouncing ideas off of him, and you know, really kind of the rest is history from there. He released 5.1 and I packaged these scripts up and I put them on this little website for $3. It was $3 the first shift, and it was great. People like, I was new to the community, but people like Frake and Jeffrey Way and Taylor himself were kind of using it in those first few weeks. You know, you're watching the little Stripe emails and you're seeing these names and you're learning the community and you're like, oh my gosh, that's Larecasts, you know? And, you know, I'm getting feedback, and it's just been that times a million, you know, since then.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's sort of the coolest way products or apps start. It's just like talking to somebody and being like, oh yeah, I think that'd be amazing. And then you're just like, okay, I'll just go build this. So to kind of shift gears a little bit from the paid shifts that you run and basically run your business, but as a community service, you send PRs to open source packages so that way they can be up on Laravel 12 at the moment. I guess the moment Laravel 12 was out, they're able to go ahead and merge your pull request and be supported on Laravel 12.
Yeah, that's honestly the biggest drag. And again, going back to kind of the no breaking changes, like sure, there might be no breaking changes from the framework, but there's still going to be things that make your upgrade challenging, or things that you might have to do. And one of the biggest always has been third-party dependencies. You know, oh, this one's not compatible with Laravel 12. I mean, we've all seen that huge dump of a composer super technical message, problem 1, problem 2, problem 3, problem infinity, like, oh my god, you know, and it's just like 17 package illuminate view, you know, 4.7. It's like, I don't even know what's going on here. It's just so much information to digest. So I hope to help people stay away, you know, from that. I hope to kind of protect them from that in a way. And so over the years, we had this tool Jess and I worked on a couple of years back. It's caniupgradelaravel.com, and it just redirects to a little service within Shift. You can paste in your composer.json file, and we kind of give you checkboxes of what has compatibility. But over that time, I actually started to take some of that data that, you know, you're giving us your list of packages that you use, and we can kind of start to rank them. I was already doing this anyways when you ran Shift to know, well, what are the big packages? Like Laravel Collective HTML used to be a huge package. Every application used this thing. And because of that, it helped me make Shift better, because now I know, okay, if there was a big breaking change in Laravel Collective, I'm going to go ahead and do it too. Even though it's not Laravel directly, like framework related change, I'm going to go ahead and put this in whatever Shift it was, just because, again, it makes developer lives easier. So this is all an effort, again, to kind of just make that upgrade process seamless, because there's always stuff you have to do. And there's always something that's going to be automated or automatable. And this is kind of the last frontier, if you will. If I can truly, even at a third-party level, start to bump dependencies or let you know, okay, this one has their own upgrade guide, you know, and who knows, maybe someday even start to automate pieces of that for very, you know, popular packages. That would be, you know, that would be ideal, because then you can truly run Shift, you can merge, you know, and it's just all kind of seamless. So helping the community get there, helping the community not have that drag, you know, is important. Not just for Shift, but hopefully, you know, Laravel and the community at large. I mean, you know, by comparison, look at communities like WordPress, for example, and avoiding all the WP drama and all that stuff. Like, those communities are in a way, you know, burdened by the kind of legacy of the code, again, because of their sheer size of that community. You know, you probably have sites running WordPress 3 something still, right? And I don't know the latest, greatest version of WordPress, but the point is that WordPress themselves doesn't want to alienate that WordPress site still running version 3, right? So like they can't move as quick. And I don't think Laravel would ever want to be in a place where they can't move as quick as they are, right? That's kind of a signature. That's kind of again, a trait of the community is kind of moving quick and adopting new features and just shipping, right? You can't really ship if everybody's still running Laravel 4.2 and no packages are Laravel 12 compatible, right? Like it just, that's where I tease for another nickname and kind of call myself the garbage man. Like I'm taking out the trash so our city stays clean, right? Our community stays clean. We don't have as many of those 4.2 apps floating out there that can't do all the cool. It doesn't matter all the cool stuff you talk about if no one can do it, no one can run it, right?
Exactly. And two, I mean, just, I don't, being around a long time, there's been so many releases where like I have this obscure package and it's like, it's just forgotten about, on GitHub, and you like go and make a comment and be like, hey, can you bump the version dependency to, whatever, Illuminate 10 or something.
Yeah.
And it's just dead silent. You like hear nothing. And it's like, well, I can't update until we get this fixed. And then it's like, oh, well, now I got to go figure out how to like run my own fork of this package.
Yeah.
And, it's just the whole thing. And so, I greatly appreciate you doing this as a community service on that angle, because I think it is hugely beneficial for maintainers and for the people that are just waiting on these updates that they can't get.
Yeah. Again, I just think it's an all-around good community service. Like, sure, you can peg it as marketing for Shift or whatever, but I'm not making anything directly off of those PRs. They just truly help the community. They help me. I mean, just like you, I use third-party packages that, Vimeo is a prime example. I think Ben and I always tease about this, that like, that package just never, it'll be like August and it still is not Laravel 12 compatible. It's been 6 months since the release, but day one, you can at least see the PR from Shift. And a lot of times it is just simply a composer dependency bump. There's not, again, no breaking changes. There's not anything that you need to do theoretically for Laravel 12 other than just make sure your composer compatibility exists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's a question. So I did a little AMA on Instagram where I was just like, hey, I'm going to interview, JMac from Laravel Shift. You got any questions? So one of the questions does Laravel Shift, let me see if I can speak. Does Laravel Shift support complex updates? And they didn't give really any context, but I'm assuming like one of these, crazy apps that people just built back in the day that has all this crazy stuff. Does it have support for like all out of the box things, or or do you take that question a different way? Maybe I should ask you your opinion on it.
There's probably a lot of different ways you could read into complex. My guess is probably the way in which they're structuring the app, right? Maybe they're doing some quote unquote unconventional things, right? So I think historically there might have been more truth to the fact that if you followed Laravel conventions, that's Shift is for those conventional apps. I think that might have used to be true, like early Laravel 5 versions. But probably around Laravel 5.6, 5.7, I started switching to more static analysis inside of the Shift, what I call the engine. And once I did that, it really didn't matter what conventions you follow, because I'm really just parsing PHP at that point. I'm not looking for like Laravel syntax per se, right? I'm just, hey, if you've got X method in your abstract syntax tree, like I'm going to do something with it. And so at that point, Shift became much more robust for, complex applications or applications that are unconventional. Like if you mean complex in the sheer size of code, Shift's a computer. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's 100,000 files or 10 files in your app. It doesn't matter if you have 200 controllers or 300 models. It doesn't matter. It might take 5 or 6 more seconds to run, but as far as the automation itself, it is not more complex just because your app is large. So I think complex apps probably means, maybe you have your own namespaces, you've sub-namespace things, maybe you're following like a modular design. For the most part, Shift is going to handle those without any problem. I think the only area where it might get a little funny is, again, if you're following a modular design with a very opinionated, there's some third-party packages that do modular or domain design, and they're very opinionated. The way in which they might structure that code, there are probably things that Shift could miss. But the argument would be that, well, that's the upgrade guide for that package. Like, you chose to use that package, and therefore you're choosing to take on, you made a trade-off to take on that upgrade framework as well, right? Like, you're kind of using a micro framework in that scenario, so you have to go upgrade it on your own. I didn't make a shift for that thing. So
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm always curious too, like when I think complex, I think of like the modules like you alluded to, but but there's so many Laravel apps out there, I'm sure like you've seen some of the craziest stuff that's been created, and modules is probably not the craziest.
No. Yeah, I mean, if you mean complex as in you don't use Eloquent and you use Doctrine directly, yeah, I probably can't help you too much there. Sorry. So there are boundaries for sure. But yeah, if you do things mostly conventional and you're not using any kind of, again, sub package that has its own conventions that if kind of exist in your application, I think that Shift is going to have you 100%. But yeah, and the other thing to the point that you said, and again, the whole thing of 10 years and the upgrades and the context, I've answered thousands of emails that have, oh, well, Shift did great, but it missed this, right? It missed this here's the little, because everyone that runs a Shift, especially the new ones, I have a follow-up email, and I say, hey, how'd it go? Did you have to make any manual changes? I read every single one of those. I've done that for 10 years. So the depth that Shift can go to make, these changes, it's not just the upgrade guide. It's the upgrade guide plus 10,000 of your fellow developers that are giving me feedback and saying, this is good, but here's this other change. It's not documented, but it affected us. Add automation for it. Add a PR comment. Add something. Something's going to be in Shift that's going to let you know. So sure, while something maybe wasn't a breaking change or even documented, Shift is probably still going to sniff that out, or it's still going to do that for you. And hopefully you're never the wiser, right? Because that's the whole point. Just make it easy. But it's in there. That domain knowledge it's all right here.
I love that. Yeah, it's one of those under the radar services that I think is unique to Laravel that a lot of other communities do not have. And for me, it's just like the perfect add-on to a framework. It's like this is great. So
and that's that drag, right?
I appreciate you doing it. Yeah.
And no, I appreciate it too, because I think that's where I take a little bit of that self-pride. Again, I joke and say garbage man, but those other communities, they might have this drag that I'm talking about because this service is missing. And so I'm glad to have made it and to offer it if that's what it's doing. Because again, that was always kind of the sub goal. Sure, I needed to use this myself way back in the day, and sure, Taylor, gave me some motivational words, but the fact that it's still here is because it's bringing that value. And again, there's always going to be changes to make in every application, and I'm glad that the community sees and appreciates the value of that, and I hope that it helps keep Laravel charging ahead, right? So
for sure. Well, as far as my questions, you have answered all of them.
Nice.
Did I miss anything you want to talk about while we're on here?
I don't think so. I'm looking forward to the Laravel 12 shift, not just because the release date is soon. I could kind of start to breathe easy after the Laravel 12 shift is done. But also so many other things that, again, Laravel's just shipping. So many other things. Cloud's coming out, the new starter kits, and maybe there's opportunity there in the starter kits. Maybe there's a shift for old starter kits to get you into the new starter kits. So there's so many things that Shift is always going to be able to look at, that even if, there just truly was some kind of seamless, beautiful upgrade built into Laravel, I think Shift would still have a place, hopefully, within the community. But I'm looking forward to making a lot of, like, the Laravel 12 Shift is actually pretty big for what I've built so far. I'll probably have a pre-release early next week. I like to have a pre-release to let those early adopters test Shift, but also Laravel 12, right? Like, get more people maybe using it before it's released. I'm excited for the automation in it. I've done a lot. I've been able to focus a lot more on the conventional refactors this time around. I think the people that stick around and use the Laravel 12 Shift are going to be surprised at, just like you were with Laravel 11, on the stuff that comes across. Like, it's always going above and beyond, and it's definitely going to do that this time.
And what to me too, this sort of comes back to, like you said about WordPress. Like, if you have WordPress version 2, it might still run, but you're missing out on all the new features that's been launched since then. And I don't even know if there's an easy way to upgrade WordPress 2, but I assume there might be. I don't know. But yeah, that's just wild. But yeah, man. Well, I want to say thank you for coming on, spending some time with us, and going through all this stuff. I'm really looking forward to Laravel 12, Laravel Shift, seeing you at Laracon.
Oh yeah.
All right. Good.
Yeah, I'll be there. I already got my ticket, but I submitted a talk or two this time around, so I'm hoping maybe I can land on stage. But the team is so large now that I don't know. That's some tough competition. We'll see. But I'd love to be able to get on stage again someday before I'm too old man JMac. We'll see.
Well, that sounds good. Well, thank you, JMac, for coming and being on the show.
Cool, man. See ya.